These are some of the most chilling and disturbing encounters people have shared online. I've spent hours digging through Reddit to find the darkest, true stories that left people terrified. Viewer discretion is advised. Enjoy the video. A Reddit user named Myra shared a story about moving into her first apartment and finding a man hiding under her bed while she was on the phone. She had dropped her phone only to realize someone was inches from her as she reached for it, and the person under the bed did not have good intentions. I am 22, and this incident happened a year and a half ago. I had just moved into my first apartment and was in the process of moving in. The door that leads into my apartment locks itself automatically when closed. I was going to the entrance of the apartment complex to get my mail while talking on the phone with my boyfriend. I returned to my apartment, sat on the bed, and opened the mail while still on the phone. I dropped the phone on the floor and it landed under the bed, so I had to lie on the floor and stretch for it. I saw something that caught my eye. There was someone under my bed. My eyes widened and I choked back the urge to scream. The person under my bed lying still, with his back toward me and his head to his chest, so I couldn't see his face and he didn't see me. Trying to be rational while so many thoughts rushed through my head, I picked up the phone and said, "Sorry, I dropped my phone. I'm just gonna take a shower and call you back." The bathroom is right by my bed, so I hastily walked in, quietly locked the door, turned the shower on, jumped out my window. My apartment is on the first floor, and called the police. They told me to wait nearby but to go across the street and see if anyone came out the door to the apartment complex. It was summer and still light out, so I placed myself across the street, hiding behind the car while watching my open bathroom window and the entry door. I called my boyfriend and he arrived just before the police. I gave the officers my keys and they went inside. Only moments later, 2 cops came out holding a thin, tired-looking man. His eyes looked crazy, but he didn't try to get away. The policeman who had stood beside me and comforted me while they searched my house, I was a mess, shivering and crying, told me that the man had stood outside my bathroom door with one of my kitchen knives, waiting for me to come out. This man had somehow crept in through my entry door while I was getting my mail and hid under the bed. The man who had been trying to hurt me turned out to be a homeless person and was placed in a mental hospital. My boyfriend moved in with me the very next day. A bit of context first. My cat likes to go outside every day. In the morning, he follows us to the door, takes the elevator down with us, and then goes about his day outside until we bring him back home again in the evening. Now, my cat isn't the most punctual guy, so it's pretty common for him to stay much later in the neighborhood, sometimes well into the night or for several days. Other times, he gets bored, doesn't play for more than 2 hours, and wants to get back inside. The problem is that we're not always home, so he just has to wait. My family and I live in an apartment on the first floor, so my cat's solution is to sit under one of our balconies and meow at the top of his lungs to get our attention. When we're home, works perfectly fine, but when we're not, it's a lot less effective. Our solution was to gently ask our neighbors who have a key to our apartment to bring him up so he doesn't have to wait outside all day. Those who don't have the key sometimes let him inside the building, so he's not literally outside, for example when it's raining. Our apartment is a bit special because it's bigger than the others. So to get inside, there are 2 ways when you enter the main hall. Take the stairs to the left and open the door that has 2 locks. Use the elevator with the special key that goes directly inside our apartment, and the door only has 1 lock. The cat is used to the second option, and me too, because we're both lazy. But when the neighbors who don't have the key let him inside the building, he goes up the stairs and waits. Since I usually use the elevator from the parking 2 floors below, that means I don't see him waiting in the hall, and he meows outside the door to get me to open up for him, or my dad, or my mom. All around, we have our habits with my parents and neighbors, and it works fairly well. Now you know how everything goes with my little guy. Anyway, here's what happened a while ago. My parents like the outdoors very much, so I'm usually left alone on the weekends. Generally, it means taking care of the chores and inviting my friends over so we can have the apartment to ourselves, which is pretty nice. This time, I was alone. It was late, around 11 p.m., and I was just chilling in the living room when I heard meowing over the sound of the TV. Someone had let my cat into the building, and he was waiting outside the door. I took my keys and started opening the first lock. I don't know about other pet owners, but I know my cat's meows by heart. Very high-pitched and very cute, with a specific rhythm because I've been hearing it nearly every day for 5 years. So I stopped. The noise wasn't what it usually is. It was too deep and just off. This wasn't my cat outside my door. He's the only cat around who knows to wait by the door and scream to be let inside. By that point, I had stopped halfway through opening the door. I waited to hear him again, and then I noticed scratching. My cat never scratches that door. At that point, I was super weirded out by the situation. But the meowing was getting louder, and I didn't want the neighbors to be woken up. So I continued with my key, when suddenly I heard another noise that freaked me out. A cough. For the record, I'm not a very cautious person, and in my whole 21 years of living in this apartment, I must have looked through the peephole maybe 5 times, but a small part of my brain told me to do it that night, and thank God it did. So I let go of my keys, put my eye against the door, and saw it. A man standing there, meowing in front of my door. Say I was terrified is really an understatement. My heart stopped. I just stood there, petrified, for what felt like an hour. I don't know how long it actually took me to move again, but eventually, my body just took over, I guess. I did what you'd expect. Ran for my phone, stood in the corner of the living room, and called the police. By the time they came, there was nobody in front of the door. I can't even remember when the meowing stopped. They just took my testimony, told me to be cautious, and left. To this day, I still don't know what that meowing guy wanted. I also don't know how he got inside the building, since you need a key to access it, or how he knew I would open the door if he imitated my cat. At least, I'll be careful from now on. Kids rely on adults to keep them safe, but when that protection is stripped away, it leaves them completely vulnerable to the darkest kinds of people. On the subreddit Let's Not Meet, a user by the name of Freak of the Night 450 shared a horrifying story from when she was just 12 years old. She and her little brother were left alone in their house late at night when a stranger broke in. At first, it just seemed like a noise, but soon she realized a massive man was sitting on their couch. What follows is every child's worst nightmare. I will start out by saying that I am not a writer by any means. I suck at it, but I will try my best. For a bit of backstory, my mom was dating an abusive prick at this time. We'll call him Ian. Because of Ian and the crazy fights they had gotten into, we couldn't lock up my house at all. He had kicked in both the front and back doors to the house, and they were never fixed. My mother and Ian were at the bar all day, every day. I told you this so you would know why the house wasn't locked up and where my parents were when this happened. This incident occurred when I was around 12 years old and my little brother was around 10. I was a really small girl at this age, and my brother was sick all the time, so he was very, very tiny and frail. My mother and Ian were at the bar, as usual. When you opened my front door, it put you in the living room, where you could see the back door. There was a hallway to the right that led back into the bedrooms, and that is where my brother and I were. We were in his bedroom with the door closed, playing something on a PlayStation. It was around midnight or 1 a.m., and we were playing and having a good time when I heard a weird noise. My brother didn't hear it, and I didn't want to creep him out. I told him that I wanted to go get a drink, and told him to stay in the room while I brought him something. To get to my kitchen, you had to walk down the hallway, past both the front and back doors, because it was behind the living room. I kept hearing strange noises, So before I left my brother's room, I told him to get into the closet and work on our fort so it would be ready when I was done getting our drinks and a snack. I raised my little brother for the most part and took care of him. I had a terrible feeling, a sense of dread. I could tell something wasn't right, and this was a way to get my brother to hide without scaring him. Frightened easily and had really bad asthma attacks. And at this time we had no inhaler or breathing treatment machine for him. Good going, Ma. I knew if he started having an asthma attack on top of being scared, it wouldn't be pretty. Anyway, I left the back room and decided to see what was going on, because I was such a badass at 12 years old. But I had to protect my little brother. I started sneaking up the hallway as slowly and quietly as I could. I was terrified. I could feel that something was wrong. Before I made it to the end of the hallway, I heard a man. It sounded like he was growling. It was a deep, terrifying noise. I can't explain it, but the feeling that washed over me damn near made me puke. So I, of course, froze. I had no one in this town, didn't know anyone, and my dad was living in a different state. My mom was at the bar, drunk as hell. I was sitting there trying to gather the courage to see what was around the corner and going over my options when I heard my brother's door open. He saw me, saw the look on my face, and froze. I remember his eyes going so wide with fear, because he must have heard the growl or whatever it was too. I motioned with my hands for him to go back in the room, and he did. I gathered the courage to peek around the corner, and what I saw still freaks me out to this day. It was horrifying. I saw a man, probably around 6 feet 6 inches and 300 plus pounds, sitting on my couch with a wicked grin on his face. That grin and the look in his eyes will forever be burned in my head. By some stupid luck, the man didn't see me. I slowly, so slowly, snuck back to my brother's room. I shut the door quietly and started going over my options. My little brother was already horrified because of the growling noise this man was making. I am so thankful he wasn't the one who saw what was out there. I mustered my brave big sister face and calmly told him that there was a man I didn't know on the couch, and he needed to be very quiet. I told him I needed him to be brave and keep his breathing in check. My little brother adored me and looked up to me. When I told him I needed him to be brave, he tried his best. I told him not to move, and he didn't. The first thing I tried was the window, but it wouldn't budge. It was completely stuck. I was making myself stay calm for my brother's sake, but I knew what was sitting out there. Since the window was stuck, I decided to start looking for a weapon. My older brother lived there too, and I knew he had swords somewhere. I don't remember where he was that night. As I was looking for a weapon, I heard the man sing, "I know you're here." Fuck. My stomach knotted up. The hair on the back of my neck stood up, and I instantly broke out in a cold sweat. And then I heard it. My little brother had started wheezing. Asthma attack. I hugged him, reminded him about being brave, and told him to sit still and focus on his breathing. I frantically tried to get the window open, but it was stuck. I looked around and started moving blankets when I found my older brother's cell phone that he always forgot. I remember thinking that I was lucky and feeling a bit of relief. I immediately called the police and told them what was going on. Hysterical at this point, but still trying to remain quiet. The dispatcher told me to remain on the phone so she could hear what was happening. That's when the man started banging on our bedroom door. It had been about 5 minutes into the phone call when this happened, and I could no longer remain calm. I fucking lost it. I started screaming. Blood-curdling screaming, the kind of screaming that would send chills down your spine if you heard it. I forgot to mention that our bedroom had the only working lock, so the door was locked. He was trying to get in and banging on the door. His banging got louder and louder, and he was screaming to let him in, when suddenly it went completely silent. Then he did the creepiest, most terrifying thing ever. He started fucking laughing. "You know I could just bust this door down in about 2 seconds, right, little girl?" Now he was lightly knocking on the door, asking me to open it. His demeanor had completely changed. Then I heard a scraping at the door. In my 12-year-old head, I imagined he was scraping the door with really long fingernails or something, but that wasn't the case. Then I heard the police start screaming at him to get on the ground, put his hands up, etc., etc. I heard him putting up a fight, followed by more yelling and eventually silence. After a few minutes, there was a knock on my door, but at this point I was too terrified to open it. I thought that this nightmare guy was still there. In my hysterical state, I started screaming, "No, please," over and over again, sobbing and shaking. I couldn't stay brave for my little brother anymore. I was on the floor holding him the whole time, convinced we were going to die. Eventually, I calmed myself a bit. This time, a female officer was at the door, so I opened it. There were about 5 cops standing in the hallway, listening to me being hysterical. I refused to let go of my brother, but we both ran to the female officer and collapsed, sobbing hysterically. We had been so scared. It turns out this guy was completely wasted and high on drugs. I remember the cops walking me up to him and having me stand in front of him to ask if I knew him. I didn't, but I'll never forget standing in front of this huge man, looking into his brown eyes that were completely bloodshot and filled with hatred. I'll never forget that growling noise he was making or the look of pure horror in my little brother's eyes. My parents were called and investigated for leaving us alone like that and for the broken doors. My mom is a different person now, doesn't drink, and is now married to a cop. She completely changed. I remember asking her about it later on, and she told me something I didn't know. The man had a huge knife. That's what he was scraping the door with. He also had rope, tape, and a tarp. I still don't know how he didn't get to us, or why he didn't just bust the door down. It would have taken one half-assed kick from him to do it. The door was super thin. It still creeps me out, and I've had nightmares from it. My husband doesn't understand why I get so furious with him when he leaves the door unlocked at night. I work third shift, so I'll come home, and the door will be unlocked. It's infuriating, because I then have to go through every room in the house and check the closets and other places a person could hide. I have 2 kids, and they will never ever go through what I did. Clowns are supposed to be silly, but during the clown sighting craze of 2016, the costume became something else entirely. What started as a prank in most places turned into something much darker in others. On the subreddit r/True Scary Stories, a user named PlasticAd7786 recalls a night from 6th grade when a walk with a friend turned into a real-life horror movie. Okay, every time I remember this event, I cannot stop thinking about it for hours on end, and I need to talk about it. I am an adult now, but at the time of this happening I was in 6th grade, year 6 or 7, I believe, for anyone in the UK. If you are in the United States, chances are you might remember the clown sightings that were happening in 2016 during the presidential election and leading up to it. For the most part, it was a bunch of college idiots dressing up as clowns and scaring people in public, but overall not too harmful. However, some places had it worse than others. Unfortunately, my friend and I had one of the more negative encounters. It was early evening, the sun had begun to set, and I was staying with one of my friends at their grandparents' house. We were walking around their neighborhood in the nice weather, just hanging out like we typically did. At that point in my life, I never would have been able to just go out with a friend and walk around the neighborhood when it was beginning to get dark if I had been at my own home. So we were enjoying the freedom. But that's when we noticed someone. Standing at the end of a street beside us, just watching, was a damn clown. Obviously this would be scary to anyone, let alone 2 11-year-olds. We tried to ignore him. We sped up and walked the other way, but he followed. We'd turn a corner and realize he wasn't far behind. So we gave up being subtle and started to run back to my friend's grandma's house, and the clown ran too. Luckily, we hadn't gone far from the house, and when we got inside, we locked the door, closed the blinds, and ran to tell my friend's grandma. Only issue was she had been sleeping and she didn't believe us for a second. At the time, both of us only had iPods. I don't think either of us had a legitimate phone number, so We frantically asked my friend's grandma to call 911. She refused, still not believing us, and instead of grabbing the home phone and doing it ourselves, because, again, two 11-year-olds, we didn't want to get in trouble, we ran back downstairs. Sneaking a look outside, we realized the clown was on the porch, and that's when we saw he was holding a knife. We, at that point, also ran to get a knife and a baseball bat they had, and we sat terrified as the grown man tried to open the front door. Perhaps one of the scarier parts of the night was when he realized he couldn't open the front door and began to walk around back. I can't fully describe how horrifying it was, watching him and realizing what he was about to do. So we both ran to the back door, locking it before he could show up. And he did, attempting to open that one too. We were quite literally in a standoff with this jackass dressed like a clown for hours, until, like idiots, we both exhaustedly fell asleep on the couch after it had been a while since he hadn't made a sound outside. I remember waking up before my friend, still with a knife and a bat between us, and slowly peeking out from behind the window curtain to see if he was still there, and he wasn't. I never saw him again, and we never really spoke about it again. I was too afraid to tell my parents because I worried they wouldn't let me hang out with my friend anymore, and I can't imagine my friend really told anyone else either after the dismissal we received from the only adult in the house. I was just a child, so my fear was eventually, thankfully, replaced with other asinine middle school dramas. But I look back on that today, knowing that there is no way of knowing what his true intentions were. Was he just another college kid being an ass and trying to scare two little kids? Or were his actions proof enough that he was more sinister, that he had worse plans than he was able to carry out? I'll never know. And with everything I've ever experienced, I can say with confidence that there is nothing more terrifying than human beings. This next post was written by a user named Conorok, who was only 15 years old at the time. He was on a family camping trip, just a few days in the woods with his parents, relatives, and cousins. On one particular night, the teenagers decided to play a simple game, manhunt. The storyteller thought he had found the perfect hiding spot, an overgrown trail tucked into the brush, but it led him straight into a horrifying encounter with someone who had no intention of letting him walk out of those woods alive. To give some explanation and background knowledge for this whole encounter, I was around 15 at the time this occurred. I was camping out in the middle of nowhere with my family and part of my extended family, my aunt, uncle, and cousins. I was the oldest kid there in the RV, so you can probably understand how it felt to have no one else to do the stupid crap I did back then with. With a good 2-year gap between me and the inferiors, it was almost like nirvana when I got to the campground and met the other teenagers. These were all people we knew fairly well from previous camping trips, so it was considered normal to hit it off with them from the start and act like we'd known each other forever within the hour. Now, the story. My parents trusted me a lot. Not a lie. I liked my fun, but I liked getting home in time for dinner equally as much. So, when I was gone most of the day with other people from the camp, they didn't think much of it. The only rule was that I had to be back at the RV to eat dinner, and before 8:30 in the evening, so picture this. A group of 6 teenagers, 15 to 16, out in the middle of the woods with no adult supervision for the vast majority of the day. Just a recipe for success right there. But this particular day, we found a neat little deer trail we hadn't found in the 2 years we'd been there before. On second thought though, didn't really seem like a deer trail. It snaked through a really thick part of the underbrush, maybe a foot of clear ground, 3.5 feet, 1 meter clear of branches going upwards. It's a really hard thing to pick out of the brush, unless you're either really looking or know where it is. It was promptly explored, marked with a broken branch outside of the entrance and quickly forgotten. Except I remembered this special little tunnel. That night, while we were all eating dinner, one of the adults proposed that we play manhunt out in the woods at night. Not everyone was totally on board with this idea, but in the grand scheme of the plan, They were quashed down like autumn leaves. Everyone got a flashlight and everyone was assigned to a team. For those of you who aren't sure what Manhunt is, here's an explanation. Everyone playing is given a flashlight and they are divided into 2 groups. It's basically glorified flashlight tag. But there's a catch. As you catch people, you have to correctly identify who they are. And if you can, they join forces with the hunters. The last man standing gets a candy bar or something, whatever is being offered as a prize. This is how we played it anyway. For the first round, I got lumped in with the runners, those who are getting chased by the hunters. We got a 5-minute head start to run, climb a tree, whatever the hell we wanted to do to evade the hunters. Usually I'm the one up in the tree, but that never really worked out as the winning spot. So, to try and score a win for once, I decided to play the cat and use one surefire method of escape. And the hiding spot was the rude little path through the thicket. It took most of the head start time to find the damn thing, because it was so well hidden and out of the way. As I passed hiding spots, I heard hushed, smothered whispering between siblings who were questioning my actions, like a bird's wings rustling when it's fluffing itself. It should be noted that I have bat hearing. My ears are possibly my greatest asset in this game, but just as I was reaching the destination, I heard the short blast of the air horn, announcing that the 5 minutes were up. I swan dove into this minute little path in the undergrowth, shuffling on my hands and knees until I was about halfway in, crouching down like some huge malformed quail. The hunters were doing an initial sweep through the trails looking for obvious hiders and people caught out trying to change spots. When they finally reached me, they hit the dead end and went straight back. I tried to readjust myself and crawl further down the tunnel. I honestly don't know how it happened, but I found an even more hidden path within that one. And, accidentally, I dragged my stupid body down the rabbit hole, except instead of ending in a dead end, this one ended in a slight hollow. I don't ever want to describe exactly what I found there. I'm sorry, but I just can't. It was a younger looking woman, naked, covered in lacerations and stab wounds, in the fetal position. Her glassy, glazed eyes seemed to look straight through me. I won't go any further than that. I was too scared to scream, and I froze there while dark, burgundy stains formed on my jeans. I froze there, in a pseudo-catatonic position, like a marble carving for what felt like hours. And then, I heard someone else coming along that path. Have you ever been so scared that, for one insane moment, you truly consider something incredibly stupid as a viable option to escape? That was one of those times. I let out a short, trembling whimper and started moving. Whoever was on the path stopped and then eagerly started moving forward again. I could hear the panting, uneven breaths of a man, horrible marker of whoever it was getting closer and closer to me by the second. By some wondrous, beautiful miracle, he missed the path leading to the brushy hollow. I heard him moving down past the entrance, dragging something clunky and awkward behind him. I heard clinking noises and the occasional effort to silence the small, sharp sounds. I heard a low curse somewhere toward the end of the tunnel, and I blasted out of the undergrowth tunnel like a bullet forcing its way out of a barrel. Cracks, crashes, and obnoxious rustling surrounded me as I heard the man sharply inhale and begin to move toward me. The hoarse, deep panting was getting closer and closer to me, a testament to how slow I was at exiting. Somehow, I exploded out of the entrance, got onto my wobbly, half-asleep legs, and started booking it down the trail. The unknown pursuer was close behind me for a bit, but it seemed like he was too exhausted to chase me at the same speed for long. I know everyone loves to rip on the fact that people always trip in horror movies, but in all honesty, tripping is something I am amazed I didn't do, with adrenaline coursing through me at the speed of Usain Bolt. Trying to make my jello-like, unsteady, walking appendages work to move me away from whoever was behind me was like trying to run on water. It felt like an eternity, but I finally reached the main trail running back to the camp and sprinted down it, screaming bloody murder. Confused faces looked out from the trees, and I think someone called after me. Reaching the camp was easy, but trying to explain why I woke up half the people in the camp and bolted out of the woods at breakneck speed was harder. When I finally choked the words out to explain, I remember a profound, insidious silence throughout the group of adults waiting at the mouth of the trail. I really don't remember a whole lot from that point on. I know the cops were called, and my mother and aunt ran shrieking and wailing along the trail, calling for the other kids to come back to safety. When someone's yelling like that, you don't ignore it. They rounded everyone up in 30 seconds flat and barreled back into the camp. The police found a man out in the woods, creeping along the trail, clutching a knife. A black garbage bag with a plethora of sharp instruments and a saw was found abandoned on the trail, some speckled and smeared with the dried blood. I don't think there's really any getting over it. I still have nightmares sometimes of the man chasing me, breathing heavily down the back of my neck, trying to catch me. Sometimes he succeeds. I love to ride my bike along country roads. Not far from where I live is a tiny town called Three Oaks in Michigan. One Saturday, my wife was working and I had nothing to do, so I strapped my bike to my car and drove the hour to Three Oaks. I parked in the scenic downtown area and then rode out of town into the surrounding countryside. As I wound my way further into the remote countryside, houses, businesses, and cars grew increasingly scarce. Eventually, there were only an occasional house or two every half-mile or mile, and cornfields and small woods flanked the dirt and gravel roads that I pedaled down. It's on one of those back roads that a minivan drove past me. Within moments of its passing, it turned around and pulled up alongside me. I looked over and the passenger, a woman in her mid to late 20s, was looking at me with her window down. The driver, a man seemingly the same age, leaned over the passenger and said to me in a slight southern drawl and with a big smile on his face, "Hey, do you know David Crist?" I thought for a brief second, but I don't know any David Crist, so I said so. The driver said, "You don't know of him at all?" I said that I didn't and apologized and then pedaled on. The van sat for a moment longer and then pulled a U-turn and drove off in the direction it was originally heading. I thought nothing of the encounter. Maybe the driver was a friend of David Crist and he thought we had met through David or something. I don't know. At the time, I didn't think I had any reason to worry. I continued my ride, turning down this road and heading north, then turning down that road and heading east. I didn't have any agenda. I was just out to enjoy the summer day and meander through the relaxing countryside. Maybe 10 minutes later, on an entirely new road and heading an entirely different direction from where I had first met the van, I saw the van again. We were heading toward each other and I gave a smile and a nod as I passed the driver. I remember thinking it was an odd coincidence that I should come across this van again. The driver stared as he passed and he had a big smile on his face. At this point, I began wondering what they were doing. They might be lost and looking for this David Crist guy, or maybe they were just enjoying a scenic drive and thought I looked like a friend of a friend. I didn't know, but I was starting to think about the situation a little more critically. I continued taking a twisting, turning, meandering path, taking this road, then that one, heading north, south, west, east. Then I came across the van again. Again, they were heading in my direction and I pulled alongside them. The driver rolled down his window and leaned out. He was a late 20s white man with a few inches of a goatee and a baseball cap. He had a large smile plastered across his face again. I stopped my bike and looked at him, waiting for him to say something, and he just looked at me for a good 30 seconds. Now, 30 seconds doesn't sound like a long time, but flag down a stranger and then just look at them for 30 seconds, and you'll realize that in that kind of situation, 30 seconds is a lifetime. Finally, he spoke and said, "Hey, do you know David Crist?" Same damn question. This time there was no smile on his face. He stared at me, and I was thinking to myself, is he joking? Does he really not remember he asked me this same question 20 minutes ago? Is he just being funny? Is he high as hell? After a moment, I told him that I still didn't know anyone by the name of David Crist, and I pedaled off down the road. It was at that time I realized exactly how remote an area I was in. I peered down the road and didn't see a house along its entire length. I was flanked by a cornfield on one side and a forest on the other. I looked over my shoulder and saw the van slowly driving down the road away from me. It couldn't be a coincidence that I had come across this van 3 times now, not with me taking random roads heading different directions. It made no sense why anyone driving would take that same maze of roads. The only thing they could have been doing was just driving around, maybe a pleasure drive. But why would they stop me and ask that same question twice? It was quite strange, and I was beginning to become a little concerned. I decided to begin heading back toward the town center. I pedaled hard. The gravel road ahead of me continued with a bend to the right and a dirt path, if it could really be called a road, to the left. As I neared the fork, who should come around the bend but the damned van? I gripped my pocket knife, which I always take with me on rides like this, just in case, and then realized all they would have to do is run me down with the van, and I would be in serious trouble. As the van drew closer, I was ready to jump off and run into the cornfields. The van slowed as it approached me, and the driver rolled his window down and leaned out again. But this time, I didn't stop riding. I increased my speed, even though I knew I could never outrun the van if they gave chase. I looked over my shoulder and saw the van sitting in the middle of the road. I took the right fork and continued on the gravel road until I could no longer see the van behind the corn rows, and then I stopped. I got off my bike and crept along the cornfield until I was at its edge and peered down the road I had just been on. The van was in the distance, driving away from me. I ran back to my bike, and as soon as the van was entirely out of sight, I turned around and took the left fork along the dirt path. I rode as fast as I could, knowing that if the people in the van had nefarious things in mind, and if they caught me on this dirt path, flanked by cornfields and far from any area where someone might come across us, that would be the time they attacked. My ruse worked, or perhaps the van was never after me at all, and I made it the rest of the way to the town center without seeing them again. When I got home later that day, I was still replaying the events in my head, and the name David Crist kept creeping through my mind. Was David Crist someone famous? I wondered. Like a musician? Should I have known David Crist? I decided to Google the name. I tried a couple of different spellings for Crist, but it was the Crist spelling that revealed a terrifying result. I came across a newspaper article from Knoxville. The article explained how a man named David Crist had turned himself in after stabbing another man at a gas station in 2013. The article included a photo of this criminal, and I believe it was the same man who had been driving the van. Had a baseball cap and a few inches of a goatee, and the man in the van was a dead ringer for the man in the article. I did an inmate search of the Knox County prison, and there was no David Crist in the inmate population. Somehow David Crist had gotten out of prison, or maybe he was never convicted, as I couldn't find any articles about sentencing in less than 2 years after stabbing a guy, and for some reason he had made his way to Michigan. Why was he driving along these back roads? Who was the woman in the passenger seat, and why the hell did he keep asking if I knew of him? Do I know David Crist? Yes, I do now.